Hey everybody, this is Rob Smith at The Body Project, and we are continuing our 28 days of the Pyramid of Optimal Physical Performance. You know, we've been talking about breathing, and tonight we're going to be talking about joint stability. I've got a wonderful client here, Linda, that we've been working with. So when you came in, what did you come in for?
I came in for my left side, kind of my hip. I was having some hip pain.
Yeah, and Linda is, she's got a history of running, used to love to run, and just got to the point where it was so painful. Now, I'm going to kind of take Linda through an assessment. Now, we're going to talk about joint stability here. Perfect example. It's kind of a fun little story with what she had going on. But we've been talking about breathing, and you have to share that. I thought this was a really neat story because in this whole process of rehabilitating her hip, we've had to obviously do a lot of core re-education. And part of that was we had to really focus on fixing how someone was breathing, right? So Linda was a classic, what?
Vertical breather.
Vertical breather. Okay, now you got to share the story.
So I was at a church meeting this Sunday night, past Sunday night, and the person kind of leading the meeting asked everyone to close their eyes and do some meditation, and she was asking people to take some deep breaths. So I cheated and I opened my eyes and saw everyone in front of me doing the deep vertical breathing, and I thought to myself, they're all breathing wrong.
That means they all have to come and see us, huh?
Right.
Okay, so she has now mastered her breathing. She has done a very good job. Why don't you lay down, and we're just going to talk about, so in terms of joint stability, just take the low back, for instance. Now, Linda was having this pelvic pain, and part of the reason why is if we look at the spine is not designed to be load-bearing. The spine is just an anchor point for the musculature. So your deep core muscles, you have the muscles that really support and stabilize the spine. When people think about the core is one of those terms that just kind of gets thrown around. So if people are doing like, the first thing you would think about in terms of core training would be like a stomach crunch or a sit-up. But that's just working global musculature. It has nothing to do with stabilization of the spine. So oftentimes when people have a low back issue, they might read an article that says, well, you need to strengthen your core. So they're doing stomach crunches or they're doing sit-ups. Well, when you go into flexion like this, it creates a lot of pressure at L3, 4, and 5, so your lowest lumbar vertebra. And so the first thing, step one, obviously, is we have to learn how to breathe properly, because even though the diaphragm is our primary respiratory muscle, again, it's a secondary spinal stabilizer. We've been talking about that. So the one thing with Linda is, because she was a vertical breather, she was losing out on that stability of her spine. Also, there's 4 abdominal muscles. Now, 2 of the abdominal muscles are actually primary spinal stabilizers. And those 2 muscles we tested on Linda, unfortunately, they were, shall we say, suboptimal. So we had to really work on conditioning these muscles. And Linda's done a great job with these exercises. In fact, when she started, she was probably at a level 7 on the pain scale. Now we're down to about a 3. But the interesting thing about this is with Linda, she was doing a great job with her breathing, great job with her exercises. But tonight we found out that and it is her left hip. Tonight we found out that her left ovary was inflamed because it was out of alignment. So we had to, Paula had actually adjusted her ovary. Now, why is that important? Well, anything within this neurological reflexive area that can potentially create inflammation can shut those muscles down. Well, when the deep core muscles get shut down, what happens is this psoas muscle that attaches right here and attaches to all 5 of the lumbar spine, that gets really tight. Because the psoas muscle says to the deep core muscle, well, you guys aren't doing your job, so I gotta work overtime here. So what happens is if we don't have good command of the intrinsic spinal stabilizers, all these muscles around the hip will compensate. And that's exactly what was going on with Linda. And so, let's take this leg down. Right in here, as we flex the hip, this hip flexor was, shall we say, quite uncomfortable. So we had to do some work here. Now, sometimes people will get a massage on these muscles, settles them down, but if the deep core stabilizers are not functioning optimally, this muscle will just get tight again. And so when we think of any joint segment, whether that's a shoulder, whether that's a back, whether that's a hip, whether that's a knee, if the muscles that surround that particular joint are not functioning optimally, then that joint will be stressed. Why? Because muscles are designed to absorb force. So if the muscles become disorganized, certain muscles get short and tight, other muscles get long and weak, they can't absorb the force, it ends up in a joint. Again, it can be a knee, could be a hip, could be a back. In Linda's case, because her deep core muscles were not firing optimally, then what happened is the hip started to compensate. Now, another area we're working on Linda is she's got massive trigger points here in her low back. And her low back muscle here, this low back muscle and the psoas muscle, this hip flexor muscle, basically are married. So when one gets really tight, generally the other one's really tight. So we were having to do a lot of work back here. So remember, the body is really, really good at compensating. It compensates around pain. So when these muscles started to shut down, that created an inflammatory process. And then what happens is her body started to compensate, her pelvis became unstable. And so now really what our goal is to optimize stability within that musculature so the joint becomes very stable. So remember, we talked about probably 80 to 90% of the orthopedic surgical procedures done today would not have to be done if people would just rebalance this musculature. So it's important to understand the reason why joints get beat up is because the muscles that surround and support those joints are not functioning, they're not balanced. So the joint does not articulate, it does not move properly. So the most important thing you have to remember is it's all about balance. Now, when we take a look at the deep core muscles, muscles are married to the same organs that they share nerve innervation with. So if these muscles are not firing optimally, again, the body goes into compensation. The hierarchy in terms of musculature are the deep core muscles, the muscles that support and stabilize the spine. So that is a hierarchy of all musculature. But what supersedes that, and the hierarchy of that, is the internal organs. So again, we were talking about she had inflammation in her left ovary. Well, that inflammation will shut these muscles down. And that's exactly what's on the chart. So the symptom is hip pain, but it can be structural. It can be related to internal inflammation from foods. There can be immune challenges, bacteria, viruses, parasites. It could be in a uterus, it could be in an ovary for a female, chemicals, heavy metals, emotional stress, scars. Scars are a big one. So a cesarean scar, an episiotomy scar, a hysterectomy scar. If you think of your nerve pathway as signaling to these muscles to contract, and you think of this as a hose, these are the things that would kink the hose. So if that hose becomes kinked, we have a decrease in flow. If we have a decrease in flow, is this muscle going to get stronger or weaker? It's going to get weaker. So we have to make sure we don't have any stressors on the nervous system. And remember, Conventional physical therapy, they're dealing with one component here, the structural component. But you can see there are multiple variables that will actually affect these conditions. So it's important to really, if you're struggling with joint pain, to make sure you get someone who addresses the body holistically and takes a look at the body as a whole, because if there's isolation and compartmentalization done at any level, there's a lot of people that just aren't going to get better. So make sure that if you got some value from tonight's video, please like the video. If you've got a friend or family member who might be able to benefit from this information, please share the video. And until we see you tomorrow, be well.